Welcome, everyone, to this Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to provide you with actionable insights and tools that you can use from discussing the research, stories, and background from recognized experts and practitioners to accelerate your impact in your current role. My goal is what we've discussed today will be immediately actionable and useful to you, and I'd love to hear your comments for this episode about what you're planning on implementing. Today, I'm excited to be joined with Dr. Burts-Cooper, who has been featured in Time Magazine, Black Voices, Smart Business Magazine, Bloomberg BusinessWeek, and Crain's Cleveland Business, just to name a few. She works across numerous industries, including manufacturing, healthcare, government agencies, not-for-profit, and small businesses. And she's also on the faculty of Case Western Reserve University in the Weatherhead Executive Education Program. Not only that, but she's also the best-selling author of aMAZEing Organizational Teams, Navigating 7 Critical Attributes for Cohesion, Productivity, and Resilience. Thank you for joining me today, Ellen.
Thank you, Charles, for having me. It's my pleasure.
So today we're going to be talking about the Manager's Toolkit, especially the Manager's Toolkit for new and emerging leaders. But I always like to start out these with identifying a certain interesting fact with your background. And you and I have talked about this a lot. We know each other pretty well, but I'd love for the listeners to understand your journey from being in the financial services industry, right? And now as a leadership thought leader in your current role that you occupy.
The transition actually, Charles, wasn't very difficult when I was in financial services and even chemical and manufacturing. The entire time you're managing teams, you're managing people, and you manage small teams and larger teams. You have one-on-one interactions. And so it's pretty easy to make the transition from having managed so many people to now being able to give guidance and direction to others who are managing across a number of industries. So I ended up leaving the organization and I started working with very similar organizations where there was a lot of transferable knowledge to help them manage and lead others.
Yeah, so this sounds like that was some great proving ground and giving you a lot of insights into how to manage those teams. And then you were able to take that information and move forward with it with your own consulting. Great. Well, I'd like to start out with then with the new manager role as they're moving into this new role. What is the difference that you see between managing and leading so that that's really clearly identified? Because I think that role changes, right? As an individual contributor or a manager becomes now more in a leadership role.
Right. When you're managing, Charles, really, we're making sure that we have the day-to-day covered. So making sure that the project plans are completed, making sure that each employee has understanding of their expectations and metrics and goal setting and the budgets and all of the things that you're responsible for managing day to day. It's a bit of a more tactical role. We ensure that things get done by a certain timeline to a set of quality standards. That's across just about any role. When I'm leading you, it's a bit more subjective. I have to make sure, Charles, not only did you get the project plan done, but did we keep up the morale when we did it? Are you really, truly engaged so that productivity is as high as it can be? So the manager measures your productivity, but the leader creates an environment where you can contribute and do your absolute best work. So it's more of the inspiration. How do I look at each particular person on my team and give them what they need to truly be successful? And that one's not something you can always just check off. I mean, how do you really know if people are motivated, right? Or you created an environment in which they're doing their best work. So it's a little bit more subjective. It probably takes a lot longer to be effective at that skill, but you absolutely need both of them to really be successful.
And you're switching between roles quite frequently as well, because you might be a leader of people, but then you're also with your superiors, you're occupying the role that you always used to. So you have to kind of switch roles and do it very effectively. And that's hard for some new managers to get used to in switching that role.
Absolutely. And you do need both. But I also see that, Charles, with really intentional practice, there are some manager leaders who do them both so well, they're almost interchangeable. They can't tell the difference because they have just really worked on both of those and making them feel seamless for the employee.
Great. And then during your programs, I noticed that you give a survey too, which I love, and you identify the biggest weaknesses for a leader. And if not at the top, usually close to the top is holding people accountable, which I think all new leaders struggle with. They struggle with those difficult conversations, which is part of that, right? You have a weak performer, he or she is not performing. How do you talk with them effectively versus avoiding that conversation? So I love to unpack a little bit about some of those tools that you would recommend for the new leaders around accountability, how to be more proactive with it.
Yeah, I would say the first thing, Charles, is not to think about it as a bad thing. We sometimes hear the word accountability and we think, oh, this is no, it really is, if you think about it, a way so the employee can have a sense of ownership in the work. It allows them to really thrive and grow when they can own and deliver as they stated they were going to do in their goals or performance review or what have you. But the step one to hold others accountable is the leader has to first hold themselves accountable. You hear it all the time, model the behavior, walk the walk, but we have to make sure that as leaders, we're doing the very things that we need to do to set the example. We have to set the stage first, be our own best example. And then clear expectations. I hear this over and over. I wanted to be accountable, but I wasn't sure what was needed of me. So making sure we're really clear on what I expect from you as an employee is a big part of it, and don't solve it for them. Many times you see the reverse delegation, we go back and we just take it back from them. Allow them to own it and not solve it. So sometimes accountability comes with a lot of questions. Charles, tell me more about what you think you can do to resolve this. What are a few ideas you've thought about? Get them to be part of the ownership so that they can be more accountable. Necessary resources are really critical. And here's everybody's favorite: address it as soon as physically possible. I know we're busy and we have a lot of meetings back to back, but when we see things happening, whether it's performance or behavior, making sure we address those as quickly as possible so that we can get on top of that and it doesn't become a habit. Then a few other things. So it would be setting the goals, making sure we provide data. Consistent ongoing feedback is really critical, because once I hold you accountable, then all of a sudden you think, oh, problem resolved. Sometimes with behavior, it may take a little bit longer. You have to embrace mistakes. That's hard to hear for people. You go, what? Yeah. When we're holding people accountable, it's a new assignment, maybe it's a stretch goal. You have to be able to embrace the fact that they're going to make mistakes, and how do we work through that? Other last two pieces I'll say with accountability: we don't lower our work standards so that they can meet them. We give them the tools, the resources, the coaching, the training they need to meet the standard, not lower the standard. And then with accountability, when we've done everything that we can do, we can honestly say we put the right resources in place, we spent the energy. We have to be able to make the hard call at some point that it could be a good person, but this is not the right assignment for their skill set at this particular time. So just in recap, hold yourself accountable, set clear expectations, provide the resources, data, goals, embrace if they're going to make mistakes, and make sure we coach them to the standard needed for the workplace.
No, that's a great process. And I agree with you. Really, it's holding yourself accountable first, right? Setting those clear expectations, which new leaders struggle with all the time, but also in making sure that you don't let problems fester. So feedback is so critical. And I heard from one other thought leader that I had on the podcast recently. He said a lot of managers do it the wrong way. They hire quick and they fire slow, when you should do it just the reverse, right? You should hire slowly. And when you know there's an issue, you should take the necessary actions right away. Now, would you agree with that? Or how does a new leader really know when it's time to say, okay, I've given the feedback, they have clear expectations, this problem is not rectifying itself, it's still there. What's the next step, and how can I be more proactive?
Well, things have to happen according to the employer's policy. So first, you abide by the policy. Typical would be you give the employee the resources, you're working with them, they're on some type of performance plan for a certain amount of days, and you make sure they have the resources they needed through that time. Once you've done that, whatever the policy dictates, whether that's 30, 60, 90 days, whether that's X number of follow-ups, you can in good faith say that you put the energy, the effort, the tools, the resources, and You've also stepped back to make sure that there could be someone else who could provide more robust coaching. I've had a number of times, Charles, where I just wasn't the person who could do the coaching. And I would say, you know what? We've identified some things that I want you to work on, but Charles is going to come in and work with you. Once I've done all of that and we're still not seeing a measurable improvement in their performance or behavior, at that point, you work with your human resources to then make the call that this may be the wrong job for the person or the wrong organization at that point.
I love that. Yeah. Coach them up or coach them out. And if you're not the right person, identify those resources. Gets a little trickier when it's a smaller company and you don't have those procedures and policies in place. But by far and large, there's a tendency that I feel that people wait too long to do it, where that cancer is now on the team or that behavior now is looked at as accepted, right? Versus you want to hopefully nip it in the bud sooner so that there's those expectations and everyone has those norms and heuristics to know, okay, here's what is acceptable, here's what's not acceptable.
Absolutely. And we wait because we think about it as uncomfortable. One of the tips that made me more comfortable with accountability is this is a gift for Charles. I mean, this is to help you grow and thrive in your role. I even start the conversation. Like, I'm putting
I
this in
love
because
that.
I want you to be better. So I see accountability as, Charles, I got something to talk to you about today. Like, I see it as excitement. Now, it's not always easy to hear, but if you know the intent and where it's coming from, and you said something really critical, that culture of feedback has to happen all the time. If it's once or twice a year, we're going to scare people. But when they're used to getting the positive feedback, hey, Charles, just wanted to call you there. You said you did an absolutely fabulous job on XYZ. And that's it. You just called for really good news. Then they understand that I'm going to get feedback regardless. Some people just give the negative or they wait too long because they're uncomfortable because they're not doing a comprehensive feedback strategy. And that's really critical if we can get a rhythm going. Because you know what happens when you've had a habit for too long? The longer you go with it, the more difficult it is to coach them out of that habit.
I think that's great. I love how to look at it as a gift. I think that's really critical and that's going to add value to a lot of our listeners around this topic. So another area in which I know that new leaders struggle with, especially in this day and age, is delegation. They feel like now I've gotten this role, more is expected of me. I need to produce more. And if I give something away and someone does a better job, they could even say, okay, well, they might have more value now. They might have an ulterior motive and they might try to sabotage my new position within the company. How do you get new leaders to really look at delegation the right way?
We first look at leadership as we grow. Our job as leaders, it is to grow more leaders. At some point, they will surpass you in terms of skills, right? So that's the idea first. We have to get our concept around the social intelligence where the job is now about putting your energy into others to make them the absolute best they can be. And that might mean they could end up being your boss one day. Hopefully, you've been really good to them, right? But that's step one. And then once you've done that, we have to look at delegation as a process, not a one and done. There are administrative tasks we might give away, but there should be some percentage of your delegation. My rule of thumb is maybe 70% of it. You grow the person through the work. Like they actually get better. They increase their skills. A competency is increased as a result of the delegation. So people are more likely to accept a task delegated because they can see the growth. Hey, Charles, if you take this on, it's going to show you how to do X, Y, Z and develop this skill. And you're more likely to pass it to the person if you know they're going to grow. But as a process, delegation is not just giving the work away. It is the training and development of the staff. And you think that's going to take more time. Yes, at the beginning, delegation actually takes more time. Giving them direction and follow up, analyzing how well they're doing, back to giving them the feedback on how well they're doing, and then periodic evaluation of the work. Once you get into that rhythm, the employees almost come to expect it. You provide work that helps me grow. You're going to direct me through that work. You're going to check in. We have a process and we continue that. That process has made people really successful with giving work to people who are in your report or your chain of command.
I love that. And that's so true that you're growing leaders, you're giving them areas to grow and develop. I think you could also remind yourself to say this gives you the ability to free up your time to focus on your areas of expertise as well, because you can't do everything well. You need to provide the value of where your skill sets, your expertise lies. So now, with some of that off your plate, right? Hopefully, you can focus more on those areas and further differentiate yourself.
Absolutely. And one model that I like to use is a tiered approach to delegation. So delineating the delegation where if you imagine, Charles, at the top of the pyramid, it's a small box. That's the stuff that you absolutely must do. Well, at the bottom of that pyramid is the stuff that they absolutely must do. We have to make sure that we're not working in areas where you're paying way too much of a salary for this job to be done. And then the employee doesn't feel empowered. So you can assign, say, a report. You don't have to give the entire report to the person. You can say on the report, I need to be the one to proof and sign off, but you need to write and do the research. And then in between, there's some steps. There's some things that maybe I should do as a leader, but if I were in a pinch, you'd help me out. And there's some things that you should do as the employee, but if it were an emergency, I could step in and help with that part of the report. So making those distinctions allow you to keep the parts that are most critical for your role, because maybe it's not appropriate for the employee to sign off. And it's probably not appropriate for you to maybe be doing the grammatical checks and the writing and the typing. So each person contributes in a way that they have the closest skill set. It's a business. I can't pay this leader or manager salary for a task that should be done at a different level. We're actually overpaying for the work to get done. Right? So I like that delineation model because each person has a role within the same activity.
I love that structure. And I think that's really helpful for new managers and new leaders coming in to use that structure that's in place, just like with scripts that they can use. I mean, to say, here are the things that I must do due to my new role. Here are the things that others must do. And then here are the areas in which I could help out if needed. Or here are the things that I'm doing, but you could help out if needed. And I think that provides that nice structure and frames it in such a way that they can put it in certain buckets, at least initially, until they get used to what that role entails.
Well, I'll give you one more in that model, and it's things that I could do as a leader. Like, it would be appropriate for my role, but you would grow as a result. It would be a stretch assignment for you. I like to tell the team about those ahead of time. So these are tasks that I'm going to be doing this week. If anybody wants to sit in on one or wants to have a demonstration of it or wants to tag along, these are things that are in my role, but they would be a really great stretch opportunity for you. Have those already laid out and allow them to volunteer. So it doesn't feel as much like delegation. Some people feel, oh, I'm just giving my work to Charles. I'm busy. They're already busy. I don't want to push it down. But when you let people know ahead of time, here's some things that would be a really good growth opportunity, they're volunteering for it. And that drives a lot of excitement. So it doesn't feel like you're pushing the work away. They're saying, raising their hand, I'd love to have that opportunity.
That's a great way to frame it as a growth opportunity. I mean, that's priceless. That's gold. So one more area that I like to go through that a lot of new managers, new leaders struggle with is how to keep their staff motivated. Now, many people just think of the standard way to motivate through promotion, through more money, but there's so many other ways between being appreciated, having meaningful work, giving them a sense of autonomy or just being challenged in their role. What have you found from your vast experience as far as what are the, say, top 2 or 3 things that really helps a staff to be motivated?
You're right. You mentioned quite a few of them. First, there are a number of things. Everyone's different. So in the spirit of diversity, we want to make sure that we honor that. Charles, you want more challenging work to feel motivated. I want less challenging work to feel motivated. One person might like the gift of time, spending time with their manager. I want the gift of time to go home a little bit early. So it's going to be different for each person. But one of the ones I've found that is all I would say close to being universal is appreciation. It is showing people that what they do matters, showing them that you're excited that they're on your team. When you can show forms of appreciation, whether that is, like I said, spending time or providing them with something. Some people are appreciated when you give them data. Right? Oh, thank you for this video. I appreciate this. Is going to help my presentation. Others feel really appreciated just by your words. Thank you. Thank you for a really productive day at work. I found that to be pretty universal. Also, if you think about it, feedback. When you give consistent feedback to your employees on a regular basis, it's not a shocker for them. It actually, as I said earlier, becomes a really good gift. It's exciting when I hear from my manager how well I've done on something and you can be very specific about it. It's also exciting to say, Charles, but I noticed on this slide, here's some things I'd like you to work on, and here's why. It would really even further strengthen you if you did XYZ. I would love to see more of that in the future. So let's talk about that in more detail. All of a sudden, I'm not criticizing, I'm simply adding value to already productive employee. So I would say diversity in making sure that we provide ways to motivate, but appreciation and feedback done correctly are, I would say, universal motivators.
When we could spend a whole episode just on feedback alone, but I'd love to touch on appreciation because we talked about this in another episode with Mike Robbins and that distinction between being recognized and being appreciated. You can be recognized for doing good work tied to the results, but no one that I know says, you know what, I'm just too appreciated. Everyone could use more appreciation for just valuing them for who they are, right? And making sure that you do that consistently and showing it throughout time so that it's not just done or tied to results, because I would argue that you shouldn't recognize people unless there's something that is recognizable, right? That there's something that they've done that is really good, because we're living in a culture where we've gotten to where everyone feels like they need to be recognized for something. I would push back on that and say we all need to be appreciated, but we need to be more selective in our recognition.
Charles, I couldn't agree with you more, right? And giving it a distinction, because if we overuse the recognition mechanism, all of a sudden there's no value to it anymore. But appreciation, you're right. I don't think anybody said, I am leaving that company. They were so appreciative of my efforts. A simple thank you goes a long way. Even a head nod, right? I had somebody give me a head nod in the audience, and I could just tell they felt appreciated. They didn't say a word, but just a physical gesture even let me know I'm checked in and I'm listening to you. That would be another one I would add to the list. Attunement. We're moving so quickly. People feel appreciated by just the fact that, Charles, you spend time with me, you check into me, and I avoid the need to have to be distracted while we have our exchange. I'm not on my phone, I'm not multitasking. For this moment, I can do a million things with my time. I am choosing to spend this time with you. So we combine those. This is how feedback gets to be a positive for employees. I've got a lot on my plate, but right now, the most critical thing for me, Charles, in this moment is to spend time with you. Great employee, and I want to see you get better. Here's some things I've been noticing. Want to see you work. All of a sudden, I'm appreciating you while I'm giving the feedback, and I'm checked in and attuned to you. They can walk out receiving constructive feedback and still be really, really energized.
Well, that's great. And I just want to add to that when you, on the other end of it, when someone's giving you positive feedback, is recognizing you, is showing appreciation, the best response for you to do is say thank you and then shut up. A lot of people deflect it. A lot of people say, oh, no, it's not me. I want to thank you. And I heard this analogy once, and I think it's a great analogy for this. It's like they're giving you a present. Are you going to reject the present? Are you going to put it on the floor and ignore it? Or are you going to accept the present, right, for what it is? And then let them have that moment so that they feel like, okay, great. He or she recognizes it and is appreciative of that communication.
Culture of humility, which is great, but sometimes that humility, oh no, Charles, I didn't do much. I did. But let's go back to frequency. The more you receive the gifts, the more you understand how to receive it. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And that's the end of it. But some people receive appreciation so infrequently, they don't know how to take it. And so that's a sign of the environment around them. So no, that's a really good point. Take the gift.
Well, great. And as we near the end of this episode, I want to let you know how appreciated I am of you being on this episode. Thank you very much, Ellen. Is there a book? Is there a podcast? Is there something that you've read recently that's inspired you that you would like to share with our listeners?
You wouldn't say it's one thing. I actually would say I literally go on and I look at places like Gallup and, Harvard Business Review and Forbes Business. And I look for what I call the feel good articles around motivation and morale and appreciation. And I don't want to go to just one source. I like to take those and sort of review and compare and contrast them. So I would take one topic, go to 5 different credible sources, and look at how they each approach it. So now you don't have just one way to do the thing. You have multiple views and perspectives because in the spirit of diversity, we all show up a little different. So that would be my tip. Take a topic, look at several credible resources, compare and contrast so that you can bring diversity into how you deliver it.
Great advice. Ellen, remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you.
They can get in contact with me through my website, improveconsulting.biz, B-I-Z. Happy to have you log on there and take a look at our services. And you can usually get me through that. We have a phone number listed and also an email.
Thank you very much for joining me today, Ellen. Really appreciated it. Great insight shared.
Thank you.
This concludes this episode of the IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. You can send us your feedback at info@ims-online.com. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, it can be found on both Apple and Spotify. Until next time, remember, it's not what you know, but it's what you do consistently that makes a difference.